Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now, where several people have been killed during protests after the government more than doubled the price of fuel overnight. The main office of the country's opposition party, MDC, and photos taken at the scene show security gates torn down, windows smashed and burnt debris on the floor. Several people have been injured and hundreds arrested in the cities of Harare and Bulawayo. Social media platforms have been blocked and businesses have closed as police patrol the streets. Access to WhatsApp, Facebook and Twitter are restricted, but some people are using virtual private network to bypass the block. The government has blamed the opposition and political rights groups for the continuing violence. Well, someone who's been following that story closely is the African Affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing, John Ofei-Ansah, and he joins me now live. Good to see you, John. First of all, what do we know? What do we know about the number of deaths and the circumstances under which the victims were killed?
About 5 or so people, have died. That's the official figure. But analysts on the ground believe that the figure could be higher. And we believe the dead people, the 5 dead people might have been shot by the security forces.
Well, that's an exceedingly worrying development because, of course, we know the history of Zimbabwe, and I think most people were looking to Zimbabwe going forward that had stopped some of these things. But we're also hearing, and we saw in the pictures there, that the opposition MDC's headquarters had been set alight and in fact torched last night. I mean, have you been hearing something similar, especially the MDC blaming ZANU-PF and vice versa?
Yes, obviously. I mean, the MDC would obviously blame, government operatives or government sympathizers or supporters for torching their offices. That is, the obvious, blame, they would apportion. But one cannot say, without any hard evidence, one cannot say specifically who actually torched the offices. It could have been anybody at all. But on the face of it, one could easily blame government operatives or government sympathizers, supporters.
Well, it's interesting that we're also hearing that ZANU-PF properties were also set alight, vehicles burned, so the violence appears to have affected everybody, even as fingers are being pointed at both sides.
Exactly. I mean, the situation in Zimbabwe now, as we all know, is getting from bad to worse. When Mugabe was ousted, or the previous year, and elections were held in August, everybody thought the ouster of Mugabe was going to usher in an era, a new era of change, a new era of gradual, stable economic growth. But this hasn't happened, right? And right now it appears Zimbabwe, the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe and the economic situation in Zimbabwe could bring the country, to a virtual halt, could bring the economy to its knees, right? On Saturday night, the government increased fuel prices by more than double. And we all know that in Africa, prices of fuel, petrol and diesel, has a knock-on effect on every other sector, on every other good and service delivery in the country. So this knock-on effect has rather, precipitated the current rout, the current unrest that we see happening in the country. Right now, the government, according to certain reports, the government hasn't even got more than $400 million in foreign reserves. Okay, and this amount is less than the amount, the electronic amounts held by the commercial banks in this country. So the shortage of foreign reserves is bound to, could bring, the economy, to a virtual halt.
Well, that's very interesting. And we're hearing reports, John, from local media suggesting that more violence is expected on the streets of the major cities today, or has already been taking place today. I mean, have there been any more protests that you're hearing about? Have people been again taking to the streets?
Well, I haven't heard anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if the protests are prolonged. Already, the Zimbabwe's biggest trade union, the Zimbabwe Confederation of Trade Unions, have called for a 3-day, sit down, right? So if this call is adhered to, I mean, it's bound to further, precipitate, the unrest going on in the country.
Yes, that's a good point, because I was going to say that part of the provenance of this is that declaration that you mentioned by the Congress of Trade Unions, which has declared 3 days of a national shutdown. And this is, of course, only day 2, but it's not clear whether this violence will continue and the temperatures will bubble over into day 3, or whether they'll calm down.
Well, it's hard to say if it will calm down or it will continue. Let me use this common adage: a hungry man is an angry man. Okay, and when one is hungry and is fighting for his food, it is very hard, very, very hard to placate him until he gets, what he wants. So I wouldn't be surprised if the unrest continues throughout the week, or even, longer than that.
As always, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your taking the time to come and explain it all very lucidly to us. John Ofei-Ansah, the African Affairs analyst and also the publisher of Africa Briefing. We're heading for a short break now. Business and sport are up next. Stay with us.